The scoreboard displayed 37-44 at this juncture. Then, Caitlin snatched the ball away. She fired off a shot, missed, reclaimed possession, and delivered a slick no-look pass to AB, who scored. That narrowed it to 40-44. 40-44. They were slowly cutting into the lead. Suddenly, Stephanie White pulled Caitlin Clark and Aliyah Boston off the floor. That specific sequence should have been the turning point. Indiana had trimmed the deficit to 4 points. Clark orchestrated the play, Boston converted the bucket, and White benched both players immediately. That decision turned a tough game into a full-blown lineup controversy. Let's get the facts straight. We have to start with Caitlin Clark's obvious irritation. Indeed, Clark was clearly furious during this matchup. Watch this moment. She maneuvers past Veronica. A slight nudge occurs, and she appeals for a whistle. I'm thinking, seriously, where is the call? How was that not a foul? We know players like Veronica Burton or Gabby Williams get those calls, don't they? Yet, the officials ignored Clark. You could see her boiling over long before the stat sheet was finalized. She felt the contact, stood up expecting a whistle, and limped away at the end of the play. This highlights three massive problems: officiating inconsistencies, player durability, and coaching confidence. It would be a mistake to put the entire loss on the referees. That is far too simplistic. A bad call might ruin one offensive series. It doesn't explain why Indiana kept breaking up the lineups that were actually finding a rhythm. It fails to explain why Clark, Boston, and Kelsey Mitchell were handled as if they were part of three mismatched systems. Nor does it clarify why the Fever responded to a struggling star. By making her role even more erratic, the biggest disconnect appears later. Indiana seemed hell-bent on limiting Clark's court time, while simultaneously overworking Mitchell. This disparity goes beyond the box score. It exposes the coaching staff's anxieties and limitations, which prevented the offense from establishing a consistent flow. But look, I see it. It's okay. She's maintaining her composure. Honestly, I really feel for Caitlin. You've got to blow the whistle, man. Call the fouls fairly. Come on. Still, the refs aren't the only issue tonight. I won't go that far, because there were some baffling choices made by the Fever tonight. Those substitutions. Seriously, what is the logic? That is the right place to begin. The officiating might have intensified things, but the rotation decisions ignited the sparks. Even when a squad boasts three top-tier scoring options, the head coach doesn't need to keep all of them on the court for the entire game. The staff must ensure that at least one capable leader is steering the ship during every critical juncture. Indiana failed to maintain that consistency. The Fever bounced erratically between plays, run for Clark, Mitchell trying to do it alone, Boston getting interior touches, and rotations favoring the bench, never allowing any specific strategy to find its footing. It felt disorganized, because, in reality, it was. The team wasn't just struggling to outmatch Golden State, they were scrambling, play by play, to figure out who was actually running the show. That duty is paramount for a primary ball handler. Clark can miss field goals and still bring immense value through her court vision, speed, passing lane gravity, and ability to grab boards. However, those contributions rely on steady minutes. When she is constantly being subbed out, returning, checking the scoreboard, adapting to fresh lineups, and trying to regain a lost flow, every minor error feels magnified. Her shooting struggles are legitimate, but so is the shaky situation surrounding her. The reason Caitlin Clark was so heated was due to that specific foul call, right? And after she let the official have it, she headed toward the locker room. I honestly thought maybe she was injured. She sat on the sidelines for quite a while. But then she came back in and played like nothing was wrong. I was thinking, okay, great, she's back. On the floor. Let's get to it. Time to work. She had a rough outing, sure. But who doesn't have an off night? This is the moment where the coaching staff deserves some actual scrutiny. Clark had taken a hit, She was limping, and she walked toward the tunnel. If the medical trainers voiced caution, pulling her was the correct call. No game in the regular season is worth risking a star player's physical well-being. But once she was cleared to return, the logic behind her limited time became murky. Was the team hiding a lingering injury? Was she on a strict, preset minute count? Was White pulling her because of her shooting percentages? Or was she just testing out new pace, roster looks, because they were trailing? These are vastly different motives, and every scenario demands a different approach to substitutions. A medical restriction should feature clearly defined, predictable stretches. A performance-based benching should reflect what is currently happening on the hardwood. A tactical pivot should fix the defensive or offensive mismatch. Indiana's methodology seemed to be a mix of all three, resulting in none of them working effectively. Clark couldn't tell if she had 4 minutes to go on a run, one bad play before being benched, or an entire quarter to establish her rhythm. Such unpredictability hurts decision-making. A player who expects a patient player scouts the floor, skipping rushed shots in favor of waiting for a better opportunity. Those who panic often settle for the first decent look available. Statistics highlight the miss but fail to capture the intense atmosphere behind that choice. It's frustrating, but your marquee players need to be logging at least 33, 34, or 35 minutes of floor time. They really need to be in that range. Don't use the excuse of a minute's limit again during this match. I'm fed up with these restrictions, honestly. Just let her compete. Let Boston stay on the court. It's baffling that she was benched late in the game. What's the strategy here? The point isn't that stars are required to hit 35 minutes every night, but rather that the team lacked any clear rotation logic. Mitchell carried the heaviest load, while Clark and Boston rotated in shorter stints. Meanwhile, Indiana struggled to erase the deficit, while hunting for a unit that could provide two-way efficiency. Boston was vital because she offered the fever, a reliable interior presence that the perimeter shooters couldn't provide. When jumpers aren't falling, the center is essential for setting screens, sealing defenders, rolling, and grabbing boards near the rim. Pulling her at a critical juncture hurts more than just the offense. It ruins the floor spacing for the rest of the squad. That one sequence perfectly illustrated the potential. Clark drew the coverage, Boston was ready, and Indiana scored. The next logical move was to pressure Golden State again, make the Valkyrie prove they could adapt. Instead, the Fever let them off the hook. This is a common coaching blunder. A plan that looks mathematically sound on paper often fails in a live, high-stakes setting. Scheduled rest matters, but the game clock shouldn't dictate everything. When a specific lineup builds genuine momentum, a coach must realize the emotional and strategic impact of those extra minutes exceeds the benefit of following a rigid plan. Man, that was unbelievable. And the wildest part is pulling Caitlin just to put Tyra in and watch her get destroyed. She was getting absolutely schooled out there tonight. She was getting carved up completely. Seriously, it was like she was being toasted by the opposition. She was getting lit up. For real? She was getting completely worked over by the other team. I don't get the logic, because Caitlin was actually putting in solid work defensively. Seriously, just watch that. Look at the effort. Caitlin was playing some genuinely tough defense, man. The predicament transcends just scoring woes. Analysts noted that Clark held her own on defense, while the substitute who replaced her faced constant pressure. This invalidates the strategic rationale for her exit. Should a player struggle with their shot but still contribute via rebounding, defensive grit, and playmaking? The head coach has clear justification to leave them in. Golden State utilized textbook discipline, pinpointing the weakest link and hammering it repeatedly. Indiana couldn't offer sufficient resistance at the perimeter. Once the initial defender was bypassed, every subsequent move became a desperate scramble. Help was late, open shooters found their marks, and the Fever were pinned into a corner. forced to choose between yielding, paint access, or wide-open perimeter looks. Clark isn't touted as the team's defensive bedrock, yet that is an unfair benchmark to hold her to here. She only needed to outperform her immediate replacement during that window. If the sub was constantly exploited, the substitution strategy failed its core goal. It neither salvaged the offense, bolstered the backline, nor seized momentum. This sparked such intense frustration. Supporters will tolerate a star catching a breather if the bench unit maintains order. They'll accept a shooter resting if the team dynamic stays positive. What they can't stand is watching the lead evaporate while the player best suited to spark a rally is glued to the pine. Honestly, just take a good look at this. Seriously, look at the data. Aliyah Boston, 25 minutes. Caitlin Clark, 26 minutes. It makes no sense to me. Lexi Hull, 22 minutes. Those are the kinds of numbers for role players. Lexi, Mo, 26 minutes. Sophie, 27 minutes. That is exactly where role players belong. But when you possess a triple threat star trio, they need to be pushing into the 30s, 33, 30, right around there. This basic time distribution reveals how Indiana viewed its hierarchy that evening. Clark and Boston sat in the mid-2-0s. Mitchell shouldered a far heavier burden. Lexi Hull, Sophie Cunningham, and others logged similar minutes to the two superstars who are supposed to serve as the team's foundation. It isn't to say those role players lack value. Hull's cuts, Cunningham's range, and the bench's hustle can decide outcomes. However, supplementary players are optimized when their roles remain consistent. A shooter needs to know which playmaker will find them. A slasher relies on knowing how the post-gravity will distort the defense. A defender functions best when they trust the scheme. When stars are constantly shuffled without a stable core, the rest of the unit is left to struggle. It's significantly tougher to build a framework from scratch than to simply refine an existing one. The Fever weren't just rotating players. They were drastically shifting their roster's character every few minutes. Indiana's peak potential shouldn't rely solely on a single trio, logging every minute. Instead, success hinges on that core setting the tone. Clark dictates the tempo and breaks the perimeter defense while Boston dominates inside. Mitchell creates space and sinks high degree of difficulty buckets. Once that rhythm is locked in, reserves can step into a working machine. In this defeat, the setup felt like it was rebooting with every swap. It's as if they are overly fixated on Caitlin's physical well-being, right? Then why keep Kelsey Mitchell on the floor during the final minutes? We literally watched Kelsey Mitchell gas out during the playoffs. Why is she even in the rotation? Her legs just gave out. Seriously, her stamina was completely gone during last year's postseason. She even had to be carried off the court. Yet, for some reason, we're letting her play 35 to 38 minutes. What on earth are they doing? At this point, it's sheer negligence. Here lies the irony that was promised at the start. Indiana's front office preached load management for Clark, yet Mitchell was burdened. With 35 minutes and a heavy offensive load, the broadcaster highlighted that massive workload by referencing Mitchell's physical collapse last postseason, questioning why their protective measures seemed so inconsistent. This doesn't prove the Fever were reckless with Mitchell, nor does it confirm Clark was fit for a larger share. Medical calls are always individualized based on physical history, recovery metrics, and real-time data. But externally, the strategy appeared erratic because the team offered no logical basketball rationale for the discrepancy. Mitchell's extended time allowed her to find her groove. She was given the space to miss, calibrate, press the advantage, and eventually hit clutch shots. Clark wasn't afforded that same grace. That discrepancy matters when evaluating their respective impacts. One athlete was permitted to navigate the game's ebbs and flows, while the other was expected to deliver in short, restricted bursts. This isn't an argument to curtail Mitchell. She remained one of Indiana's most reliable threats and certainly earned more tactical plays whenever Clark's jumper wasn't falling. The point is, the Fever needed a cohesive plan integrating their three stars. Protecting Clark shouldn't necessitate cutting Mitchell out, and utilizing Mitchell shouldn't mean marginalizing Boston. Prioritizing Boston shouldn't come at the cost of Clark's playmaking. The true failing wasn't choosing one path, favoring one athlete over another. It turned their court time into a rivalry rather than a partnership. Just let Caitlin play. Let Aliyah Boston do her thing. Not that Aliyah didn't perform well, because she certainly did. She finished with 15 points, hitting 6 of 11, sinking a pair of triples, grabbing 7 boards, and dealing 1 dime. With 3 giveaways and 2 steals, she had a solid outing. Perhaps it came a bit late in the game, but it was a productive night for her. Boston's play proved that the Fever had a better tactical option available. Posting 15 points on 54% shooting, she drained 2 of her 3 long-range shots and secured 7 rebounds. Even with 3 errors, she wasn't perfect, yet her efficiency clearly warranted a larger role in the offense. Her three-point accuracy is vital, as it forces the opposition to make difficult decisions on the perimeter. When Boston pulls her defender away from the hoop, the opposing big cannot just camp out in the restricted area. This creates lanes for Mitchell to drive and opens up passing windows for Clark. If the defense try to swap assignments, Boston can post up smaller players. If they stay put, Clark has a clearer path to the rim. Indiana didn't need to reinvent the wheel, they just needed to stick to the lineups that were actually working. Shortly before, the Clark-Boston duo had trimmed the deficit to 4 with a great sequence. Mitchell provided the necessary shot-making, so the pieces were there, they just lacked sustained rhythm. Boston struggled with foul trouble, and the broadcast questioned the timing of White's replay challenge. This is where coaching blunders stack up. Burn a challenge too early, and you lose your ability to adjust later. Wait too long, and a star player picks up a cheap foul that totally disrupts the team's defensive rotation. There is no exact science, but these choices matter most when the player involved is your main offensive catalyst. She didn't need to be the center of every play, but she needed enough volume to stretch the Golden State defense. Without that offensive variety, the Valkyries could lock in on the guards, waiting for Indiana to get desperate. Honestly, beyond the questionable rotation shifts, our defensive effort was completely lacking. We kept getting beat. Ty and Sophie were struggling. And goodness, even KK got toasted by Caitlin Clark, who was on fire tonight. It was incredible. I was actually relieved whenever she finally headed to the bench for a break. Then Tiffany Hayes just ran right through us. Come on now. We saw 0 adjustments just watching them play ISO. No zone looks, nothing changed. Get it together, Stephanie. We need better effort. I won't rehash that now. Issues with roster rotation shouldn't be used as an excuse for such poor defensive play. The Warriors sliced through their initial defenders with ease, exploited individual mismatches, and forced Indiana into constant defensive lapses. The analysts specifically called for tactical shifts, perhaps even a zone, since the same isolation struggles kept popping up. While a zone isn't a guaranteed fix, it can lead to surrendered rebounds, corner confusion, and open lanes for elite passers. Nevertheless, switching up the scheme for a handful of possessions disrupts the flow, slows down an aggressive offense, and provides cover for a struggling defender. Most importantly, it signals to the opponent that the next possession will be unpredictable. Indiana looked purely reactionary on defense. The Fever were merely scrambling after getting beaten instead of forcing Golden State into uncomfortable spots. Once the ball hit the paint, every rotation became a panic move, leading to late closeouts, missed assignments, and extra opportunities. This, where strategy and personnel become inextricably linked. You can't ask a squad to switch if your lineup isn't capable of handling it. Nor can you play conservative drop coverage if your perimeter defender can't recover and the ball handler is comfortable shooting over you. Tactics should be dictated by your players, and your roster should dictate the tactics. Unfortunately, the Fever's substitutions felt detached from the issues. Golden State was posing. They swapped players, but the vulnerabilities in their defense remained exposed. This is why the loss felt deeper than just a bad shooting night. Indiana was being thoroughly dismantled. Look, one thing I have to point out is that Kelsey Mitchell definitely should have been getting more touches down the stretch. That's just reality. Since Caitlin wasn't finding her rhythm, we should have run sets for Mitchell. Plus, Aliyah Boston had it going. Feed her the rock and let her finish. It feels like you've been stifling Caitlin's confidence for several games now. She just can't seem to find any consistency. Man, she's really struggling. Late in the game, the smart play was to prioritize the players who had the hot hand. Mitchell was heating up from deep, and Boston was playing efficiently. With Clark off, a high-level offense needs to balance those realities. That means utilizing Clark as a facilitator without forcing her to carry the scoring load. Let her bring it up, collapse the defense, and find Mitchell off the ball rather than expecting Mitchell to. Engineer every scoring opportunity individually. Utilize Boston as a screen navigator, short roll playmaker, or decoy inside. Force Golden State to combat strategies featuring all three simultaneously. Rather than simply rotating to handle individual threats, the analyst contended that Clark's rhythm has suffered over a series of matches. Whether that sweeping assessment is entirely objective is difficult to verify based on this single game. What is evident, however, is that her confidence seemed shaky throughout. She transitioned from being annoyed by physical play to worrying about her spacing, followed by bench intervals and renewed efforts to regain form. For a high-volume floor leader, fluidity is mandatory, not optional. It remains a core professional expectation. The athlete must still convert field goals, while the head coach must establish environments where the player recognizes the optimal decision. Both parties can falter at the same time. Clark can be responsible for an inefficient night, while White utilizes a rotation scheme that complicates the team's recovery efforts. Distinguishing between these is vital because sports debates often default to personal blame. Either the superstar failed miserably, or the coaching staff was the sole cause of defeat. The reality is more nuanced. Clark struggled to connect on her shots, and Indiana failed to manage the game effectively enough to prevail. Shout out to the Fever, though. They played some incredible defense. They shut things down, honestly. You have to respect it. Caitlin Clark finished with 13 points, 4 of 14 from the floor, and 1 of 8 from deep. A rough outing. Okay, she hit 4 of 5 free throws, grabbed 3 rebounds, tallied 6 assists with 4 giveaways, 1 steal and a block, plus 2 offensive boards. She was grinding on the glass. It was a struggle, but I wouldn't expect a stellar performance from Caitlin Clark if she cannot stay on the court and get into a flow. I don't get it. If I were Caitlin, I'd speak up and say, look, we arrive at the statistical summary that skeptics will cite as the final word. Clark put up 13 points, going 4 for 14 shooting, 1 of 8 from downtown, 4 of 5 from the stripe, handed out 6 assists, hauled in 3 rebounds, tallied a steal and block, and coughed up the ball 4 times. It was undeniably a rough shooting performance. There is no denying that fact. Yet, the full stat line highlights why focusing solely on her perimeter shooting ignores the bigger picture. 6 assists confirm she was still facilitating offense. The defensive stats show active engagement. Her rebounding created extra chances. Her impact was inconsistent, not non-existent. The primary issue isn't that a 2 6-minute limit necessarily caused every missed jumper. Athletes struggle in every position. The real problem is that Indiana tried to juggle 3 conflicting goals. They treated Clark as a player, needing to be shielded, held her to the high standards of a superstar expected to carry the team, and deployed her in erratic rotations that prevented the cohesion required to succeed in either capacity. That's the rotation dilemma. It isn't just about finding 7 extra minutes, it's about defining the purpose behind them. If Clark still faces medical limitations, lay out the plan clearly and set up specific rotation blocks. Keep her paired with Boston enough so that the team maintains its primary offensive rhythm and pick-and-roll habits. Stagger Mitchell's minutes so there is always a reliable scoring threat while Clark rests. Don't pull both key playmakers the moment the squad gains momentum. If Clark has no remaining limits, let the flow of the game dictate the substitutions. Provide her a decent window to break down the defense. Should she struggle, prioritize playmaking roles for Mitchell or Boston instead. That's tactical shifting, not a punishment. The real issue is the lack of clarity. Ambiguity ensures that every roster change looks suspect, every missed shot seems catastrophic, and every moment of player frustration looks like proof of internal discord. Defined roles don't guarantee victory, but they stop the team from fighting themselves while battling their opponent. Outstanding! KK finished with 6 points, hitting 3 of 4. She excelled at attacking the baseline and backdoor. Props for those 5 rebounds and just 1 turnover. Sophie had 10 points, shooting 3 of 7 from the floor and 2 for 4 from deep. I'd have liked to see her get a few more opportunities, but that's how it played out. 2 boards, 2 turnovers, and 4 steals, Sophie. I see your effort out there. Honestly, statistical evidence confirms Indiana received solid production. The bench provided activity, rebounds, steals, and sufficient outside shooting to keep various lineups effective. Cunningham put up 10 points, hitting a pair of triples and swiped the ball 4 times. Another bench player finished with 6 points on, 3 of 4 shooting by exploiting openings along the baseline. These are useful assets, but they function best in supporting roles. 4 steals spark transition. Backdoor cuts punish defensive lapses. Spot up, shooting creates spacing. None of these traits require the Fever to discard their primary system. They should complement it. Critiques here need to be measured. White wasn't forced to choose between stars and ineffective players. She was rotating a group of capable contributors who deserved those minutes. The error wasn't utilizing the reserves. The failure was in not maintaining enough offensive creation and defensive grit during those transitions. A smart rotation pairs reserves with at least one established starter. A reckless one expects them to carry the load entirely. Faced with a Golden State unit moving the ball crisply and targeting weaknesses, that distinction was the turning point. The Fever's next move must be tactical, not reactionary. They don't. There's no reason to freak out over one bad game. The team requires a substitution strategy that can weather a poor shooting performance from Clark or foul trouble for Boston, while managing intense pressure on Mitchell without resorting to panicked, disorganized play. Seriously, I found the lineup changes tonight baffling. It was just awful, truly abysmal. But credit to the Valkyries. They really came in and dominated us. Just look at the bench production. Those numbers, 14, 13, 12, are incredible. It's wild. They hit 52% of their shots. Golden State earned this win. The Valkyries were highly efficient, got meaningful contributions from their reserves, and capitalized on every mistake Indiana made. This defeat wasn't about a bad referee call or one specific substitution. Golden State simply outplayed them and exposed the Fever's vulnerabilities for everyone to see. That's why you can't just blame the loss on Clark needing to make better shots. While that's true, a championship-caliber team shouldn't depend on their lead guard performing perfectly just to keep the lineup functional. A real system exists to ensure the team stays competitive when the star isn't at her best. Indiana has the tools for a better outcome. Clark excels at pacing and playmaking. Boston provides stability in the post to facilitate ball movement. Mitchell can anchor scoring runs and exploit defenses that overcommit to the perimeter. Hull and Cunningham provide defensive energy, spacing, and movement. The team clearly has a defined identity. The coaching staff just needs to stop getting in the way. The upcoming match will demonstrate if this was a one-time experiment or a strategic shift. Keep an eye on who is on the court after Indiana finds their momentum. Watch if Clark gets consistent minutes or sporadic intervals. Observe if Boston stays active when her scoring is high. Notice if Mitchell is supported by a deliberate game plan instead of being forced to carry the load, and see if the defensive scheme adjusts before another team hits 52%. So, what's the verdict? Was this mainly about Caitlin Clark failing to sink her shots, or did Stephanie White's rotation decisions prevent Indiana's stars from establishing the necessary flow to take control of the game? Leave your thoughts below, hit the like button for more analytical Fever content, and subscribe so we can track the next tactical changes based on real results on the floor.